Hello, everybody. I'm Michael James, and I'm welcoming you to another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. We're out of Chicago. I'm up here in the very blue, wonderful 49th Ward. We do love Chicago, and we're glad to be here. We hope wherever you are, you had a really good Christmas and a good New Year's. There was a lot of celebrating going on. I confess to having fallen asleep before midnight, only to be awakened by firecrackers in the very near vicinity of my abode. I hope that people have had a good enough dose of football. We're getting near the end. We only have to watch one more game between Michigan and Washington to see who is the national champ, so to speak. And on the pro front, we got one more Bears game, and then there'll be some playoffs and all that fancy stuff that I'm sure we'll watch. I've got a couple of really wonderful guests coming on today. They're both two guys that I met in the summer of 1966 when I was working in Uptown with the group Join Community Union, a project of the late great Students for Democratic Society. I should say there is a new Students for Democratic Society, and we have had them on the show. Anyhow, I met both Bob Lawson and Steve Goldsmith when we were all young and full of energy and full of excitement, enthusiasm for building an interracial movement of the poor. We were about social, economic, and political justice. And both of them have gone on, Steve Goldsmith and Bob Lawson, to do serious organizing in communities, in the labor movement, et cetera. We're going to hear from both of them about what the work that they're doing now and a role going forward that all of us can play for this big election, which will give us a choice in November between a semblance of democracy or out and out fascism. On the good front, going into the new year, there are a lot of people who care, who are very active in doing good work. And we're going to try to bring you a number of those people over the next year, as we have throughout the past. On the negative front, some of our challenges are not only to get people who have been shackled to their fear and doubt for a long time, but get them to see that just because you are upset about, money, cars, payments, all that kind of thing, doesn't mean you throw a guy out of office who has generally done a good job and bring in out and out fascists. So that's our theme for the next year. I think I'm going to leave it at that and just say we do have to pay attention to what's going on in the Ukraine, what's going on here in Congress, and Republicans refusing to allocate money for both the Ukraine and Middle East unless they get some changes on the border, which should be a very separate issue. The pending border situation is heavy and it affects all of us. And I'm not going to point any fingers other than we could get a lot further if the Republicans were a little more cooperative. Okay, we'll be right back with a little bit more information and our first guest after a little short musical break. Be right back. We're back with more Live from the Heartland. This is our post-New Year's Eve show. We're recording it a couple days after New Year's. And we're really glad to bring on someone who I first met, as I said at the opening of the show, back in 1966, Steve Goldsmith. And he's hanging out in California, but he's just back from, I think, a year in Italy, in Florence, Italy, because he and I were going back and forth. And when Florence came up, I said, "Oh, that's my mom's name." And he was going, "Oh, where is she? I'll go see her," or something. And turned out he was in Florence, Italy. And tell us a little bit about what you're doing over there, Steve, or what you did now that you're home.
Well, it was only 3 months, but and my wife was teaching a semester abroad she taught a class in film on fascism and resistance. And so I read a lot about the resistance movements in Italy and learned, wow, plus also how it was such a turning point in history with the development of science by Galileo and modern art and things like that. And it's an amazing place.
What was your sense of the politics there? Because speaking of fascism, I thought they had elected a woman who pretty much is on the right side, on the wrong side of things on the right there.
Yeah, well, the only place she didn't win, I think, or one of the only places, was Florence. And
Good.
So that was good. And they did, I found out about it a little bit too late, but they had a large evening march against what was happening in Palestine, led by, I think, a Catholic priest and a rabbi and a imam.
Uh-huh. So do you get a lot of walking in while you were there?
Yeah, 58 days out of the 90, I did 15,000 steps or so and lost 12 pounds. And we also marched in London. We went to London for a wedding, and there was 300,000 free Palestine marchers.
Yeah, it's heavy. It's going on. Well, let me go back to our early days together, and we both showed up in Uptown. And I'm not sure how you got there, where you were. I had been gone to school at Lake Forest, heard about SDS when I went to Berkeley to go to graduate school, got involved with SDS and the community organizing project Join in the summer of '66. How about you?
So I went to the March on Washington in 1963, and that kind of confirmed. My parents were leftists. We fled to Louisville because my father was blacklisted in New York as a communist, and then he knew Paul Robeson and Henry Wallace, so I had that kind of tradition. And when I hit that march, it really resonated. And so I went to Atlantic City for the Freedom Democratic Party thing in '64. Then I went to Mississippi in the fall and came back to the University of Chicago and started with Heather Booth, SDS, Friends of SDS chapter, and I mean Friends of SNCC, and then the SDS chapter, and organized buses to go to the March on Washington in '65. Then the SDS office moved to Chicago, and so I worked in the office for a few months and was on the National Administrative Committee. So when somebody said, I said, "Well, what should I do?" And they said, "Go uptown." And so I got involved in Join, and then was there for a couple years. I finished Chicago, University of Chicago, and then as Join began to be more the community saying we want to be here, it also happened that the draft board said your number is up, but I had gotten conscientious objection status, and they gave me three choices, and one was Florence, Kentucky, but the other one was Louisville. So I went to Louisville, where I had grown up, and as it happened, a guy started a movement inside the military at Fort Knox called FTA, Fun, Travel, and Adventure, or as most soldiers knew it as Fuck the Army. And so we had a coffee house there, and Peggy Terry came down and gave a speech in the white neighborhood that we organized when she was running for vice president. And the Klan came and attacked us, and Ann Braden and Carl Braden. So we had to run off from that. And I think you were there.
I certainly was, and I've talked about that many times. What I remember is there was probably 40 or 50 people, white, there, and Peggy and I were singing "We Shall Overcome." I'm strumming the guitar, and the next thing I know, the police disappeared, and all of a sudden, people were throwing rocks at us. And I remember going back to the Carl and Ann Braden's longtime progressives who you knew well. So what happened then? You working in the coffee house? What did you do for the next 50 years or so?
So after we kind of had a version of Rising Up Angry in Louisville too, with my roommate Fred James, and then stuff happened in a personal relationship which I wasn't too proud of, but so I went off to kind of think about, this was '70, what to do with the rest of my life, and wound up in visiting my sister for 2 weeks, but turned into 2 years, and met some people who said, well, what we should do is go among the people. The idea, there were two trends in SDS. One was go blow up bathrooms, and the other was go out and organize, and that was the one I liked. So I went to work, and they weren't paying people. There weren't jobs like Greenpeace and things like that. So the place where you could get paid to organize was go get a job in a steel mill. So I worked in a steel mill for 10 years in Northwest Indiana, trying to do rank and file organizing. to try to make the union more progressive and against discrimination and segregation in the mills and things like that. And so then when that kind of played out, I was part of something called the October League and working with, what do you call it, Mike Klonsky and all those people around the country. And when that kind of fell apart, my first wife, who had lived in India as married to an Indian revolutionary in the countryside, but had to leave because she was white and he had to go underground. So we met in a discussion group. And so we got married and came to Chicago and Northwest Indiana. And she worked in the steel mill also. So we said, well, what can we do? And her first husband came along and said, hey, why not do educational tours to India? I can arrange unusual stuff over there. So we did that for 10 years. And then when that kind of played out, I didn't really, it just was what it was. But my brother-in-law, who is this great mediator, Ken Cloak, who is one of the leaders of the Berkeley free speech movement.
I know Ken, yeah.
Was on top of the police car and all. So he said, well, why don't you take this class in mediation? So I took a class in mediation, and then this job opened up. They were trying to get somebody to start mediations between kids who have committed a crime and the victim of the crime. It's called restorative justice. And so started that program, and it's still going. We've done tens of, I've retired from that, had the good luck that it was administered by a city government. So I had a CalPERS pension, but we did tens of thousands of mediations where the kid learns what the victim, what his action was for the consequences and then they do an agreement to make things right. And it's shown to cut recidivism by 50% or more. And now the LAPD, big bad LAPD, has an agreement with the agency. It's called CYS, and they have a website, CYS-LA, and it uses .org, uses volunteer mediators that we trained, and then they would, the LAPD, if the kid goes through the program, they can say they've never been arrested. They file the arrest. And then we added parent-teen mediation, which was very effective for kids in conflict with their parents, and peer mediation and other conflict resolution programs with the idea that the justice system is just toxic. And so we try to keep kids away from it, keep them in school and out of jail. And I did that until 2016. And then when I retired from that, I kept working there for another few years as a consultant. And then because I knew about mediation, and I had joined Rotary for just to make my boss happy, but then I found out this is an amazing organization, about 1.2 million of people who are there mostly to serve the people. Service above self is their slogan, and they work to try to make things better in their community. And that really impressed me.
Let me jump in for a second. And
Yeah.
I did want to say on the conflict resolution, I had one experience with that when some kid broke in and stole ice cream, et cetera, from a stand we had down along the beach. And they worked out really well. And the Rotary Club, tell people what the Rotary Club is, because when you mentioned it earlier, I remember when I was at a hot rod club speaking to the Rotary Club, and then later in my Heartland Cafe years, speaking to a Rotary Club here in Chicago. And both experiences were real good. And you are wowing me with all the good things you shared earlier about the Rotary Club. So tell the listeners what the Rotary Club is.
Okay. And just as a note, Bernadine Dorn was doing a similar program in Chicago to the restorative justice program. And the goal of that, by the way, was to transform, not just to serve individuals, but to transform the whole juvenile justice system in Los Angeles, which they've made great strides, big change from the 1992 when we started till today. But Rotary, and again, I saw this as a attempt a place to do mass work, like the steel mill, like Rotary. Let me see what I can do inside of Rotary as an organizer.
Right
So it's
on.
got 1.2 million members in every town and city in the world, 197 countries, and they're most famous for eradication of polio, down to a few cases in Afghanistan and Pakistan. But they did things like had an inoculation day in India, and 150 million people in a single day got shots because of Rotary's work. They advocated and got the World Health Organization and UNICEF involved and the Bill Gates Foundation involved. So they both did direct inoculation type, immunization type work, door to door, and also advocacy for it. Then they have 6 other areas of focus: maternal health, water and sanitation, economic development, and in more recent years, peace and conflict prevention and environmental sustainability. And because of my mediation stuff, I said, hey, I was part of something called Mediators Beyond Borders International, which is a growing organization. It's been around since about 2010 or something, and founded by Ken Cloak. No, 2003, when he saw the paratroopers being dropped into Iraq in shock and awe. He said, well, wouldn't it be better if we were dropping in peace builders? So I set out in 2013. The president, international president of Rotary that year, had the slogan "Peace Through Service," and he had 3 big peace conferences. So we set out to make little MBB, a partner of this massive organization with $1 billion foundation or multi-billion. And so after 6 years, I and some other people succeeded in making MBB, which is now one of 7 international partners, 7 or 8, like UNICEF, Peace Corps, and things like that. And this little MBB that does principally training of women peace builders to take part in ceasefire processes, in truce agreements, in peace projects in their local town and country and city. And so I took part in a training in Indonesia for women and some men peace builders from 7, different countries, which got funded by a Rotary Global grant. And so if you have any of the listeners have a progressive idea, go. Rotary generally meets once a week. They used to be all white men, and now
that's what I remember.
Yeah, in 1988, a woman won a case in the Supreme Court breaking it open, and now about a third of Rotary are women. They've had international presidents who are women, lots of district governors and things like that. And their diversity is at the places that it's growing is most robustly is in the third world. So after I got that finished, let me get to my most recent.
Let me before you go to the most recent stuff, let me just ask, my impression of the Rotary basically were the businessmen in my town in Connecticut, and they were white guys. They were older, of course, than to us. But what's your sense of how Rotary people might vote and where they're at politically?
Well, I would say, particularly in the U.S., they're probably 50-50, or probably with the Trump experience, they're probably 75. Trump and the right-wing Republican really goes against Rotary philosophy. Service above self is their slogan. And also they have the 4-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill? And will it be beneficial to all? So how can you be a Republican with that as your ethics? And so there's a lot of controversy, and we shouldn't be involved in controversial subjects and all. But that's what the kind of Mediators Beyond Borders is. Let's have peaceful conversations on difficult subjects, so as to get these there are, I would say, 2 different viewpoints in Rotary. The most clear example was the district governor in Los Angeles after George Floyd, put on the newsletter, "All Lives Matter," and got all kinds of shit for saying, because that's kind of code for, Black lives don't matter.
Yeah.
And
I don't
so,
think people mean it that way necessarily, but
no, but she didn't mean it that way either, but she got a lot. And so people quit a club and then they came back and then they took it off. And so we had some really good dialogues and saved that club from splitting up over what does that mean.
okay, Steve, hit us with your current work,
So
how
after,
environmental work.
yeah, so after about the same time as I was wrapping up the MBB stuff um, and Rotary stuff, there was an explosion at the Torrance Refinery, which is in South Los Angeles County. And as a result of that, I learned and the community learned that there's a chemical there called hydrofluoric acid kept in large quantities that an 80,000 piece of equipment came within 5 feet of the HF tank. If it broke, it forms a low hanging cloud and kills within a few minutes, many, many miles away, up to 5, 6, 10, 15 miles away. It can still kill or permanently injure. It's used in 41 refineries in around the United States. Most don't use it. But so we've been fighting for that, fighting at the local air quality regulations for legislation. And now in the next week or two, the EPA may release a rule to require conversion away from HF. And if anybody wants to see what the effect could be, there's a movie called The Railway Men on Netflix. It's a 4-part series and shows what happened in Bhopal, which is a very similar chemical. So my approach is to keep organizing. And what we've learned in every one of these struggles is that unity is decisive. Disunity, people fought over small differences, severely injured the ability of this local organization, Torrance Refinery Action Alliance. If you want to know more about that subject, go to TRAA.website. And there's videos on it and everything tells you the whole story about HF. But the main lesson is, and for any organizers out there, is persistence to keep at it. It may take, when you go into a battle, you have to assume it's going to be 10 years before and there's a Marcel Mastroianni, the organizer movie, where he says, they don't let you win the first time, and, and joins battles against police brutality. And here we are, 40 years later, and we're making inroads about police brutality. I don't think we've solved it yet, but so in each battle, you have to assume that it's going to be a long battle. So prepare for that. Make sure your life situation is such that it sustains you, and keep work, whatever it is, whatever somebody wants to do. I've learned in this TRAA thing, somebody said, well, let's do this. Let's go leaflet there. Okay, let's do it. And like right now, somebody's got a bunch of plants, and I said, oh, we've been through that, but that didn't do it. Let the person whose idea it is go for it, support it. Whatever action is where the success flows, and just keep reminding, the slogan, the thing, what is it? The people united will never be defeated. Well, the key word there is united. If you're not united, you're not going anywhere. If you are united, you might win. Even against big, powerful oil industry, we fought them to a draw for 4 years. And when they divided us, that's when they were able to stop our advances. So that's my lesson for anybody who's involved in the movement. And it's the best thing. It's a purposeful life. Here I am at 79. I am going off to play tennis, so I've still got my health. But the thing to do is live life for purpose, for meaning, because most of us in the U.S. have food, shelter, and clothing covered, and some of us have love, and we can all have purpose.
Steve, that was really great hearing all these things you've done. And I would like to invite you back on to be more specific on any particular thing you're interested in doing.
Always welcome to, and I keep in my heart all the joint people. That's where I learned the love of the people, the power of the people. To see those folks marching, see those people going down to the welfare office to fight for somebody else's welfare check. That was too good.
You're a hell of a guy, and thank you very much for coming on live from the Heartland. Everyone else, stay tuned. We're going to be right back after a short musical break, and I mean short. We'll be right back with our next guest, another former joint organizer, the one and only Bob Lawson. Okay, Steve, we'll see you in a few. Thanks a lot. We're back with more Live from the Heartland, and it brings me a lot of pleasure to bring on another old pal, another person I met back in the organizing days in Uptown with Joint Community Union, and that would be Bob Lawson, who's been on this show numerous times. I try to get him on over and over to be our labor guy and fill us in on what's going on in the labor movement. Sometimes he goes for it, sometimes he doesn't. But most recently, just the other day, Bob sent me an article out of the blue from a magazine called Fast Company. And it's about the worst union busters of 2023. Goes on to say organized labor won major victories across the country this year, but that just inspired companies to fight back harder. And then it goes into most egregious examples. So I took this as a possible way to get Bob to come talk about that. And he agreed, and here he is. And how about, Bob, start off with some good things that happened in the labor movement this year, as much information as you want to lay on us, and then we'll go to some of the negative things and the challenges.
Yeah. Well, thanks. And Happy New Year. There has been a huge upsurge of union organizing, of people who don't have unions fighting to get unions. That's the most exciting thing that I've seen in the labor movement in a long time. That everything, I think there's like now, the huge numbers, 9,000 Starbucks workers have organized for a union. REI, I think there's 8 REI stores that have organized for a union. A big hospital, doctors are starting to organize for unions. As a country that as wealth and power inequality has increased, it's taken a little time for people to figure out that the power we have is to organize. So this organizing is going on in spheres all over the place, that university grad students, professors, in almost every sphere that people are organizing. And so that, to me, that is really exciting. And what happened with the United Auto Workers strike, which was very creative, and showed that not only does organizing matter, but when you win, that you can win huge improvements in people's lives. That I remember when we were young, that in the time that the auto workers were negotiating with the big 3 auto companies, everyone would look in the paper every day or to find out how much of a wage increase they're going to get, because that set the standard for the society. And so when 30% of the workers were organized, it wasn't only organized workers that won the benefits, it was all the other workers as well who got benefits because the employers were trying to keep up. So the excitement is around the organizing, and it's not just the UAW that won big in their strike this year. The Kaiser healthcare workers did, the UPS workers did. And so, it's exciting, and it's exciting when you talk to particularly young people. And these days, almost everybody's young, according to me,
You're young to me, buddy.
That they understand how unfair the society is and how unfair the wage situation is. And we're not even talking about the, Uber drivers and so-called gig workers who, under the pathetic labor laws in the U.S., don't even have a right to form a union. And so the good news is that people are fighting back. People are learning how to be organizers in every aspect. And a lot of people who may not have the right to organize a union under the law are figuring out legislative ways to do it, where, home care workers are winning wage increases in some cities. People are winning, gig workers are winning wage increases. Other places, people are using their power, like I believe it was the state of Washington, passed a law that employers are not allowed to have captive audience meetings, et cetera, et cetera. But so that's the good news. There's a lot of momentum, a lot of optimism, a lot of people learning to organize, and a lot of people understanding the value of organization. And I think it's also opened eyes that the way the UAW did the strike and the way they projected themselves as, we got to fight back. It's for the whole working class, et cetera, is all good news.
We'll go into the UAW a little bit later. I want to do a quote from that article you sent me from the Fast Company magazine about the worst union busters in 2023. And they said, according to the Economic Policy Institute, employers spend $433 million per year on union avoidance consultants, outside specialists who are brought in and paid hundreds of dollars per hour to convince workers not to unionize. Talk a little bit about the challenges that the labor movement and people wanting a better deal in life are up against.
It's people haven't been through it, don't understand what a difficult situation people who don't have a union because the law is so weak. The law essentially says, and I have to give the National Labor Relations Board under Joe Biden, and particularly under the new general counsel, a lot of credit for trying to work within the law to strengthen it for workers. But essentially that employers can break the law at will with almost no penalties. For example, although it's illegal to fire somebody for organizing or discipline them, if somebody gets fired for organizing a union, maybe a couple of years later, if they win their case, the employer has to put a letter up on the wall apologizing for firing the person, and maybe hire the person back. And the only back wages they get are wages that if they have another job, those wages are subtracted. So for a company that's trying to scare the workers, that they can fire somebody, and it's particularly for these big companies, but it's almost no penalty at all. And the other thing that I think people don't realize, and I can go into more detail about how the anti-union consultants work. They've been doing the same thing for decades. But the other thing, and I think that the article is getting at, and that a lot of people don't understand, is that employees winning a union election where they've said that they want a union, the majority of them vote to have a union. The federal government says, yes, you have a union, and the employer has an obligation to negotiate. There's nothing that says that the employer has an obligation to come to an agreement. And so the employer can stall, can lie, can do whatever they want. And at the end of the day, if they are convicted of not bargaining in good faith, which is what it's called under the law, the penalty is that they have to bargain in good faith. That's the only penalty they face for not bargaining in good faith. So the typical play and what you see going on at Starbucks, at Amazon, it looks like at REI, et cetera, is that the employer stalls and stalls and stalls with high turnover. A lot of the leaders leave, or they continue to harass the leaders, or people get demoralized. Then after a year, the employees, quote, have a right to have what's called a decertification election, which is to get rid of the union. And surprisingly enough, that quite often, after the employer has stalled for a year and brought in people that it selects, that they have decertification campaigns. So it takes the union resources, again, to fight another campaign to win that election. And then the penalty for the employer for having lost that election is that it has to bargain in good faith again. So I don't know, I forget what the latest figure is, but it used to be something like only 50% of the unions that won elections ever got first contracts. Hopefully that's going to change because there'll be much more public support and so on. But ultimately, to have a fairer society, we're going to have to change the labor laws in this country. That's not on the horizon now. So what we have to do is just support the workers in these campaigns for a first contract.
Let's go back to United Auto Workers because they certainly set the standard, it seems like, and they've talked about Sean Finn, who was a kind of the opposition candidate within the union, and he won. And he's been really out there, and he's been very good. He's talked about going after Tesla and some of even the big three plants in the South. Now, you are actually a veteran of some of that organizing in the South. Why don't you talk a little bit about the UAW and the plan going forward and the hurdles that they face?
I have to say I don't exactly know the plan of the UAW going forward, which is a good thing that people don't actually know the plan. But the general theory, and this is different from because of the climate we're in now, and because of the amount of momentum they created and the anger that people have about the wealth inequality, is that in the past, that because of the labor laws, et cetera, that it's been very difficult and slow moving to organize one factory at a time. And that gives the anti-union consultants and employers a chance to scare the hell out of people, as they did in the South. They get elected officials to speak against it, et cetera. So what it seems to me from the outside that they're doing is capitalizing on this momentum that they got from winning this great contract. And the way they won the contract was very smart, involving the members at every single stage of the campaign. So with that, the non-union workers are looking to the UAW and saying, hey, if they can get this, we can. Because what happened is right after the UAW won, all the employers, non-union employers, started giving their employees big raises. And the reason they did that is so they can say, well, you don't need a union. Look what we did. And they go through all this BS. We're family, blah, blah, blah. They're just going to take your money. So what it looks like the UAW is trying to do is, in a different way than they've been doing, is to just allow or urge the workers to self-organize and to go for an election as quickly as they can. But in union elections, the theory is, in the operating theory, is the law says you have to get 30% of the employees to sign authorization cards to have an election. That you almost never win an election with employer opposition if you get 30%. So the UAW and most unions that have had successful campaigns get 70% to sign authorization cards. That indicates that the union is something that the overwhelming majority of the people want. It means they've been able to build a good organization inside the company so people feel represented, et cetera, et cetera. So it looks like they're trying to do a lot of really fast self-organizing, doing trainings for worker leaders, et cetera. It's much more difficult to organize a big plant than it is, say, a small Starbucks, et cetera. And there's much more ability for the anti-union consultants hired by the company and the managers to play games with people, to pit people against each other, to pit departments against each other, et cetera. So it's kind of an open question whether this strategy is going to work or not. I'm really hopeful that it will. But
how different is it from when, as I believe you worked on the attempts to organize Nissan down in the South somewhere? And
I was distant worked on it, but that it's completely different. Because of the the public nature of the UAW fight to get their contract, they're making this a public fight from the very beginning. And it's seen as a much more of a movement than just as a one-off organizing. The question that I have and that other people have is, are they going to have the sort of the skills and patience internally to be able to self-organize to stand up against the employer campaign? And will this be enough to withstand the public pressure? In the past, the UAW has tried, in my opinion, did it way under-resourced, did not devote nearly enough resources and staff time to training internal member organizers to own the campaign, and that did not have sort of the public political clout to make workers feel protected. And one of the major problems in the South in particular is that a lot of these auto jobs are better than any other jobs around, even though they still, workers are injured, they're stressful, they're still underpaid, the companies are still making billions of dollars, but compared to looking around, so they play on that a lot. So
I'm going to go back a little bit, back to the article, and another quote in the article was, "Not every employer puts up a fight when their workers move to unionize. The American Federation of Labor Congress Industrial Organizations," that's the AFL-CIO, a federation of 60 national and international labor unions representing 12.5 million working people, reached an agreement with Microsoft in which the software giant agreed to remain neutral if any of its workers decide to unionize. This is good news for the workers in the burgeoning tech sector and places Microsoft in a sharp contrast to most of its peers. Other tech titans like Amazon, Alphabet, and Tesla have fought tooth and nail to either defeat their own workers' union drives or scare them out of even considering signing a union card. Any thoughts on that?
Well, when the National Labor Relations Act, which governs the way unions are formed in the U.S., was originally conceived and passed in the 40s, that the idea was that whether or not to have a union would be decided by the workers themselves, not about the company versus the workers. It was whether the workers wanted it. The company's role was to be neutral and couldn't interfere. Over the years, the law has changed and the interpretation has changed to allow companies to fight the union like crazy. That the neutrality agreement that Microsoft signed, and hopefully they'll live up to it, is extremely rare these days. Ben and Jerry's ice cream did one as well. That the goal always is to ask employers to say, stay out of this, let us decide, and so on. So it's a really good thing that Microsoft did it. I hope they live up to it, and I hope the employees take advantage of it. But it should be the goal of community organizations, of churches, of everybody that wants a more just society, to urge employers to stay out of this. This is the employees' business, whether they want to form a union. Most employees want to do a good job. They also want to be able to make a living. And so it's in the benefit of society for the wealth gap and the income gap to be closed. And the unions are the only, if not best vehicle for doing that.
Bob, let's go look forward a little bit. When I was growing up, going backwards, I always thought of as the working people were for the Democrats and were for unions. It's not quite that clear and simple, but we do think that labor is generally on a more progressive bent than certainly the Republicans. And I'm wondering what you think the role of labor will be in the upcoming election in November, as well as what you think we ought to be doing now getting ready for that election.
Well, I suspect that organized labor will be endorsing Biden. Some have already. Um, I hope, which I don't know, is that that means that unions internally will begin doing a lot of political education so they can mobilize their members and not just donate money to TV ads. That the one of the reasons that so much of the Midwest used to be, a progressive place was because there were unions, and unions are a way that working people get political education and learn about what's going on, as opposed to looking at Fox News or MSNBC or something. So I'm hoping that unions do that in a one-on-one basis with their membership. Whether they will or not, I don't know. I know that some of the young, new young people who are organizing have are going to do that, and so on. But that's what I hope they do, because there's a huge resource of people. There's organizers, etc. And I hope it doesn't. I hope it doesn't become an either or between union organizing versus working on politics, which sometimes it has in unions. But I think they go hand in hand, and they should continue to do that. I think that people just need to understand that this is a long-term fight, and that there's going to be two choices for president. One is a fascist, and so labor organizing and any hope of a revitalization will go away if Trump is elected again. Biden's done some good things for unions. He's in a difficult situation. I think about Lyndon Johnson. Those of us who are old enough think about Lyndon Johnson, and part of the way with LBJ led to Nixon. So I just hope that people can understand that there's going to be one of two people elected president, and it'll make a huge difference as far as whether we can build a progressive movement in the future.
Bob, in a minute or so we have left, I started off the show talking about both you and Steve Goldsmith being compatriots, partners, and pals, comrades in Joint Community Union. In my new book on Rising Up Angry, you have a piece at the end about things you learned from Joint Community Union. Why don't you just talk a little bit about, as we go out, about being an organizer, some of the things you learned and were inspired by?
Well, being an organizer is great because you get to learn about all kinds of people, and you get to join together with people who many you would never run into in your normal life if you weren't an organizer, and go through life-changing events with them. The feeling of people who go through a union campaign, or winning a rent strike, or winning a strike with a union, all of those things are like both life altering for the individuals, as well as making material improvements in people's lives. And for an organizer to be able to experience that, and to be able to get to know people all over the place and have that deep connection with them in struggle for something better and bigger than ourselves, is a real privilege. And so I think being an organizer is great, and I'm lucky that I got to do it, and happy.
Well, I'm glad we've gotten to run into each other a lot over the years. You do inspire me a lot, Bob. I want to share that with you, and I'm very grateful to have been your coworker, your partner, your comrade in a couple of organizations. And I think we're close to running out of time, so I think I'm going to say thank you very much to not only Bob Lawson and Steve Goldsmith for coming on and talking about their experiences and their views on things, as well as our music producer, Lynn Orman, our engineer, Hal James, our co-producers, Katie Hogan and Tom Clark. We will see you next week, and I'm sure we'll have some interesting guests for you. So have a good week. See you around.